I have been a manifest compliance officer for 19 years, and in 19 years I have never once looked up from my clipboard during an intake transfer. That is not indifference. That is the job. You look at the manifest. You check the numbers against the physical count. You stamp, you file, you move on. The universe runs on paperwork, and paperwork runs on people who do not get distracted by the contents. Waystation Keller, 9 sits at the junction of 3 transit corridors in a system that matters to no one except freight haulers and the Federation scheduling office. We receive maybe 40 transfers a month. Livestock, industrial components, agricultural samples, the occasional live specimen moving between research postings. Everything moves through on the same manifest template, the same intake counter, the same fluorescent strip lighting that someone installed in the first year of the station's operation and never replaced because it still technically worked. The loading hall is 60 meters long and 20 wide, with a bank of frosted skylight panels along the northern wall that let in gray or amber light, depending on the time of day and the mood of the local star. In the morning, it is gray. By afternoon, it is something close to gold. The Vathani Biological Cataloging Division filed their transfer request 6 weeks before arrival. I processed it myself. 11 units of biological material, non-human, Kethalan origin, catalog series, KA 774, 1 through KA 775, 1. Bound for research installation Veth Karat, on the far side of the transit corridor. Keller, 9. Was a waystation stop. Nothing more, a refueling layover, 18 hours, during which the units would be offloaded into our holding bay for temperature stabilization, then reloaded and gone. I filed the paperwork. I confirmed the bay allocation. I checked the environmental specs against our holding system capacity. Everything matched. I did not think about what the units were. That is not something I am proud of now, but it is true. In 19 years of manifest compliance, you learn to read past the category fields. Livestock, biological material, non-standard, organic. These are just codes. They tell you the environmental requirements, the handling weight class, the documentation trail. They do not ask you to think about what is inside the container. The Vathani BCD ship came in at 0840. Which is when the skylight panels are still gray and the hall smells of cold metal and recycled air. I was at the intake counter with my clipboard, the yellow one, the physical one, the one my supervisor Jenna Orvath gave me when I transferred to Keller. 9 because the electronic units kept losing their charge in the cold end of the hall. It has a mechanical stamp wheel along the base of the board, 12 positions, 12 stamp heads, the most common procedural codes. The serial number sticker on the back wore through years ago. The stamp ink is blue, the good permanent kind that does not smear if you breathe on it. I was cross-checking the inbound manifest against our bay allocation sheet when they started coming through the airlock. I heard them first. Not distress sounds, not anything dramatic, just footsteps, 11 sets. Light, careful, spaced out in a single line. And then the Vathani handlers, 4 of them, in their gray assessment coats, each one carrying a handheld scanner and a data slate. The Vathani BCD handlers move like they are performing a calibration exercise. Every step is deliberate. Every gesture is economical. They do not talk unless the work requires it. I looked up. I am still not sure why. I have never looked up during an intake transfer, but something about the particular quality of the silence in the hall that morning. 11 people walking, without speaking, without looking around, without doing any of the things people do when they walk into a new space, made me lift my eyes from the clipboard. The Kethalan are tall. That is the first thing you notice. Or, the first thing I noticed. Though I had never seen one in person before that morning. Tall, with limbs that are proportioned slightly differently from human limbs, the forearm a fraction longer than expected, the neck carrying the head at a very slight forward angle, the way a person leans in to hear something. Silver skin, or something close to it, not metallic, not shining, but a cool gray-white that catches light differently than human skin does, almost as if the surface has a very faint translucency. Wide eyes, dark, set far enough apart to give the face an openness that is arresting, even at a distance. Their hair, if you can call it that, is fine and pale and lies close to the skull, and some of them had it gathered at the back of the neck with a simple tie. They were wearing what the transfer manifest described as standard, holding garments, gray, unbleached fabric, utilitarian, clean, but not comfortable. Each of them had a tag on a cord around their neck. Not a name tag, a number. I stood at my counter, and I watched them file into the holding bay processing line, and I did not stamp anything for what must have been 2 full minutes. The Vithani lead handler, a Veth Class 4, named Orvath Saul, according to his BCD credentials, which I had on file, came to my counter with his data slate and set it down for my review. Transfer party KA7741 through KA7751, he said. 11 units, all within environmental tolerance. Refuel layover, 18 hours. Bay 7. Confirmed, I said. Because that is what you say. He turned back to his line, without waiting to see me stamp the manifest. The Vithani BCD do not wait. They are efficient. Every motion is billable. I looked at my clipboard. I looked at the line of Kethalan women moving through the processing queue. The Bay assignment clerk, a young man named Tev Oron who had been working Keller, 9 for 3 months, was directing them toward the biometric station in order of their catalog numbers. I looked back down at my manifest sheet. I have thought about that moment many times. The moment of looking down again. It is the easiest moment in any intake transfer. The moment when you decide that what you are seeing is not your business. That your business is the paperwork and the counts and the procedural codes, and that anything beyond that is someone else's department. The Vithani BCD are a licensed cataloging division. They have legal standing in 42 Federation transit corridors. Their documentation is always in order. Their handling protocols are professionally maintained. There is nothing in the station operating manual that requires me to do anything other than confirm the manifest count, issue the bay assignment, and stamp the received code. I looked at the manifest. 11 units. Environmental class. C-2. Temperature controlled. Humidity managed. Handling weight class. Medium organic. The documentation was clean. The numbers matched. The route was clear. I looked at the line again. The biometric station is at the near end of the bay processing area, set into the wall, a gray panel with a scanner aperture and a handprint reader. The handlers move each individual to the station in turn, scan the handprint for the catalog record, confirm the biological marker matches the transfer documentation, and log the result. It takes about 90 seconds per individual. The line moves at the pace of 90 seconds. She was 7th in the line. The scanning process requires the individual to stand at the aperture and place their hand on the reader. The reader is set at human standard height, which is slightly low for the Kethalan, so each of them bent slightly at the waist to reach it. There was nothing in the gesture that was distress. It was simply an accommodation, the kind you make without thinking when the equipment is sized for someone else. But when the 7th one reached the station and bent to the reader, and the scan light swept across her hand, she did not look at the aperture. She looked out toward the skylight panels. That is the moment I have thought about. Not the word I said that came later. Without planning. Without intention. The moment I have thought about is that she looked at the light while the machine was recording her biology, and in looking at the light instead of the machine she was, in some very small and possibly only personal way, refusing to be entirely inside the procedure. She was somewhere else. In her attention, in that specific direction of her gaze, she was not KA7747. She was a person who noticed that the morning had gone amber while she was not paying attention. I know that because later I checked. KA7747. That is the number on the tag she was wearing. At the time I did not know her number. I only knew that she was 7th in the line, and that when the line paused, there was a brief hold at the biometric station. One of the scanners needed recalibration. A common enough delay. She turned her head and looked around the hall for the first time. Not with curiosity. Not with fear. With the careful, assessing quality of a person who has learned to gather information very quietly, without being noticed doing it. She looked at the skylight panels, and at the far wall where the cargo racks stand, and at the intake counter where I was standing with my yellow clipboard. And her eyes landed on me for a moment, the same even, measuring look, and then moved on. I said it very quietly. I was not speaking to her. I was not speaking to anyone. It was the kind of thing you say to yourself, under your breath, the way you comment on a piece of music, or a good piece of light on a wall when there is no one nearby to hear you. I said, "You're beautiful," and turned back to my manifest sheet. I heard the line stop moving. It is a particular sound, the absence of 11 pairs of feet. The hall was not silent, the recycling fans run constantly, and one of the cargo loaders was running at the far end, but the specific rhythm of the processing queue simply ceased. And when I looked up again, she was standing still. The Vithani handler behind her touched her elbow to move her forward. She did not move. She was looking at me. I have tried, in the years since, to describe what her expression was in that moment, and I have never quite got there. It was not surprise, exactly, though it had the architecture of surprise. It was more like the expression of a person who has heard a sound they had concluded, categorically and with evidence, was no longer possible. A sound that had been filed away, archived, sealed, and had just played again from a direction they could not account for. The handler touched her elbow a second time, more firmly. She blinked and moved forward in the line. I stamped 3 items on my manifest sheet, and did not look up again for 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, I thought about nothing in particular, and kept my pen moving. Then I looked up. The biometric processing was nearly complete. The Vithani handlers were cycling through the final confirmation scans. The Catalan women stood in a row along the near wall of the bay, waiting, each with her hands at her sides, each looking at a point slightly above the opposite wall. Not at the floor, not at each other, not at anything in the room. At a middle distance that exists only in people who have spent a long time learning to occupy no more space than strictly necessary. The 7th one, KA7747, was looking at the skylight panels again. In the last half hour, the light had shifted from gray to the beginning of amber. It lay across the frosted glass in long, diffuse bars. I put my clipboard down on the counter. Tev Oran was at the biometric station, running the final log. The Vithani handlers were conferring over their slates. Nobody was particularly watching the line. I walked across the hall. This was not something I had planned. I did not have a speech prepared. I did not have a plan at all. I walked across the hall because she was looking at the light, and I wanted, for no reason I could have defended, to stand where she could see me without turning her head. I stopped about 2 meters away, which is the distance at which you are clearly addressing someone without being intrusive about it. She did not look at me immediately. Then she did. Up close, her eyes were not simply dark. They were a very deep amber brown, warm in the center, and darkening toward the outer edge. And they were the eyes of someone who was alert and present and wholly intelligent and had been doing an enormous amount of work not to show it. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice low. "About before. I didn't mean for you to hear that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in Federation standard, accented but precise, "I have not been spoken to in 31 days. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The handlers use designations," she said. KA 7747, or Unit 7. They do not speak to us otherwise. She paused. "You were not speaking to me either, but you used a word that is meant for a person." I did not ask how she knew Federation standard. It did not seem like the right question. "What is your name?" I said instead. The amber eyes shifted. A small change, but it was there, a kind of checking, a test of whether the question was sincere or procedural. Savel, she said. My name is Savel. I am a third-generation cartographer of the southern continent of Kethala. I have a son named Vethral who is 11 years old and is staying with my mother while I am away. She said all of this in the same careful, level tone, and I understood that she was saying it not to give me information, but to say it aloud, to put it into the air of the room to verify, through the act of speaking it, that it was still true. I said, My name is Bren Solis. I check cargo manifests. The corner of her mouth moved. It was very small, but it was there. A cartographer, I said. Maps, she said. Survey work, mostly. The southern coastal shelf, tidal adjustments, seasonal migration corridors for the kelp, the large migratory animals of the southern lowland. The BCD classification is biological specimen, advanced taxonomy. They would not have been specific about what they intended to study. She said the last sentence with no emotion, the same way you state a weather forecast. Behind me, I heard Tev Oron's voice reading off catalog numbers. Beginning the transfer to Bay 7. The Vithani handlers were moving the line. I looked at her for a moment. Then I turned and walked back to my counter. I picked up my clipboard. I turned it over and looked at the stamp wheel along the base. 12 positions, 12 stamp heads. I had used maybe 4 of them regularly in 19 years. The others I had never touched. I rotated the wheel past the common codes. Received, pending, cleared, hold, and found the one I was looking for on the 9th position. Category dispute. Non-standard biology. I had stamped it exactly once in my career, 4 years ago, on a shipment of Keth Suran botanical samples that had been miscategorized as inorganic mineral freight. The stamp freezes any transfer, pending a formal category review. 30 days minimum. The review request goes to the Federation Biological Classification Authority, who are famously slow and famously thorough, and who, during a review, require all transfer paperwork to be withdrawn and resubmitted. The regulation exists because biological misclassification is a liability issue. A specimen filed as one category cannot be held, transported, or transferred under a different category's protocols without exposing the handling party to a formal dispute finding. The Vithani BCD would know this. They would object. They would file a counter notice. They would request an expedited review, and probably get one, because the BCD had excellent legal representation, and the Federation Classification Authority was not, in the end, going to stand between a licensed cataloging division and its inventory. But the counter notice takes 3 working days to file. The expedited review request takes another 5 to process. The review itself, even expedited, is 15 days minimum. That is 23 days at the shortest, and more commonly 30. In 30 days, I could make 9 calls. I knew one person at the Federation Consular Office, a woman named Dara Selvis, who had processed 3 of my station's transit exemptions, and who owed me a professional favor I had never called in. I knew that the Kethalan were a member species under the Consular Protection Compact, which means their citizens have a right to consular notification before any category-level processing. I did not know whether the BCD had provided that notification. I had a strong feeling they had not, because the BCD operated under a research exemption that they applied broadly and aggressively, and because the paperwork I had in front of me listed no consular notification number in the field where one would appear if it had been filed. A missing notification number is a manifest discrepancy. I rotated the stamp wheel to position 9. I pressed the stamp down on the intake form, firmly, the way you do when you want a clean impression. The blue ink circle appeared on the paper, crisp-edged and very deliberate, around the words, Category Dispute. Non-standard biology. Then, I carried the form to Orvath Sol. He was standing near the bay door, entering final confirmation data. He looked at the form. He looked at the stamp. He looked at me. "There is no dispute," he said. "The classification is accurate. Kethalan are listed under Advanced Biological Taxonomy, Class 3. The paperwork is compliant. The consular notification field is blank," I said. KA 7747 is a Kethalan national. The Consular Protection Compact requires a notification filing number in Field 7 of the Transfer Manifest for any Class 3 or above specimen of a compact member species. I don't have one. That's a manifest discrepancy. Under station protocol, a manifest discrepancy triggers a category dispute review, and during review the transfer is frozen. I paused. "I'm sorry. Station protocol." Station protocol. Orvath-Sal's face did not change. The Vathani BCD handlers are very practiced at faces that do not change. "You will receive a formal counter notice within 3 working days," he said. "That's fine," I said. "Your units will be held in Bay 7 under standard environmental protocols for the duration of the review. You're welcome to remain on station or to proceed and arrange for a collection vessel when the review concludes. 18-hour layover refueling is included in your original docking fee regardless." There was a silence in which Orvath-Sol calculated several things. I do not know precisely what he calculated. I know that he concluded, accurately, that the fastest path through the situation was the formal counter-notice process, and that there was nothing to be gained by confronting a manifest compliance officer over a procedural stamp when the stamp was technically correct. The BCD does not make scenes. They are very large, very well-funded, and very patient. They do not need to make scenes. "Noted," he said, and turned back to his data slate. I walked back to my counter and made the 3 notations that a category dispute requires in the station log, and then I sat down on the tall stool behind the counter and put my hands flat on the surface and was very still for a moment. I was 47 years old, and I had never done anything that required me to be very still for a moment afterward. I should say something about the regulation, because it matters to understand what I was doing and what I was not doing. Category dispute. Non-standard biology is a procedural code, not a rescue mechanism. It exists because the Federation's biological classification system is a patchwork of legacy frameworks, treaty addenda, and post-compact amendments that frequently contradict each other, and biological misclassification is a liability the Federation takes seriously because misclassification lawsuits are expensive. The stamp is meant for cases of genuine taxonomic ambiguity, a specimen filed as Class 2 when its cognitive markers place it in Class 3, a flora sample, miscoded as fauna, that sort of thing. It is not intended as a tool for manifest compliance officers to insert themselves into transfer processes they find uncomfortable. I knew this. I used it anyway. I used it because the notification field was blank, and the blank field was real, and because in 19 years of checking manifests, I had never once found a reason to use a procedural stamp that was in the manual, and now I had a reason, and I was going to use it cleanly and correctly, and without pretending it was anything other than what it was, which was the furthest reach of what I could legally do from my position at a desk in the loading hall of a waystation that mattered to no one except freight haulers. The BCD would object. They would prevail eventually, in all probability. I knew that. I stamped the form anyway. At the consular office, at 1140, after the BCD handlers had settled into the station's visitor accommodations, and the morning shift had handed off to afternoon. I told her I had a compact member species citizen in a category dispute hold and a missing notification number, and I asked her whether the consular office could do anything with that in 30 days. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're certain the notification number is missing? Field 7 is blank." Another silence. "I can file a consular interest notice," she said. "That doesn't automatically resolve anything, but it puts the BCD on notice that the consular office is watching the case. And if they can't produce a retroactive notification, which they probably can't, because if they'd filed one it would be in the field, then we have grounds for a full consular review, which takes 60 days minimum, and which they cannot expedite. How long to file the interest notice? Today, she said. I had Bay 7's environmental protocols reviewed and adjusted to Kethalon standard, the temperature, the humidity, the light levels. The specification was in the BCD transfer paperwork, intended for the holding conditions at Research Installation Veth Korat. I used the same specs. I put in a request to the station galley for Kethalon dietary items. Keller, 9's galley is not extensive, but we carry a reasonable range of Federation standard provisions and some non-human options for the transit population. The galley manager, a cheerful heavyset woman named Pol Veth, looked at the spec sheet and said she could manage most of it, and what she could not manage, she could approximate closely enough. I did not go back to Bay 7 that afternoon. I had a station to run, or the small part of it that was mine to run. I processed 2 more intake transfers, corresponded with the scheduling office about a delayed freight shipment, and wrote up the category dispute documentation in triplicate as required. The paperwork took 90 minutes and was detailed and careful, and I did not make a single error in it, because I did not want to give Orvith Sol anything to work with. I went back to Bay 7 at 1730, which is when the skylight panels are deep amber and the hall smells of whatever Pol Veth has been cooking for the evening shift. They were sitting in the bay, all 11 of them, on the standard transit seating that lines one wall, the fold-down benches that are designed for human proportions and are slightly too low for Kethalon ones, so that they all sat with their long knees a bit higher than comfortable. Someone had been to the galley already. There were provisions on the low table, some of which had been touched. The light from the skylight was the amber I described, long and warm, and it caught the silver gray of their skin and made it look, in the evening light, more like copper. I stopped in the bay doorway and looked for Savelle. She was at the far end of the bench, the last one closest to the external observation window. The observation window on Bay 7 faces east, toward the cargo yard and the far docking ring, and beyond the docking ring, the grid of the transit corridor, and beyond the transit corridor, if you know where to look, the very faint smear of light that is the Kethalon system. She was looking out of it. I walked down the length of the bay. Some of the others watched me. None spoke. I sat down on the bench, which required folding my own knees up somewhat, as I am not a tall man, and the bench height that is too low for the Kethalon is approximately correct for me, and put my hands on my knees. The transfer is on hold, I said, keeping my voice low. 30 days minimum. Probably 60, depending on how the consular review goes. She did not move. She went on looking out the window for a moment. Then she turned to look at me. Why? She said. Your consular notification wasn't filed. The BCD processed Class 3 specimens under a research exemption, which they applied to compact member species nationals, which is legally questionable, but rarely challenged because... I paused. Because usually there is no one at the waystation who checks Field 7 of the manifest. But you checked it. I check everything, I said. It is the job. She was quiet. The amber light moved slightly as the station rotated, and for a moment it lay directly across her face, and I saw that she had a very faint scar along her left jaw, not a deep one, a thin line, old, the kind that comes from something sharp and incidental and long ago. A field scar, maybe. A cartographer's scar. The kind you pick up working coastal shelf territory with high tidal variance. What does the hold mean? She asked. Practically, you stay here for the review period. The consular office will send a liaison within the week. They will want statements, yours and the others, about how you were collected, whether the notification process was followed, whether you were informed of your compact rights. I paused again. I need to be honest with you. A consular review doesn't automatically mean the BCD loses the transfer. They have very good legal representation, and the research exemption is broad. But it means the case goes through proper channels, with proper oversight. And 60 days is a long time for the political situation to change. The political situation, she said. The Kethalon Compact membership is under review in the Federation Assembly. There has been a motion regarding the BCD's research exemption and its application to compact member species. I read the scheduling update this morning. It has been tabled for a committee hearing in 45 days. I said this carefully, because I wanted her to understand that I had read the update, that I had not simply stumbled onto a procedural stamp and hoped for the best. 45 days. A 60-day consular review would span that hearing. She looked at me for a long time. Not the measuring look from this morning, this was something different. It was the look of someone doing rapid and very serious arithmetic. My son is 11, she said. I know. He does not know where I am. The consular liaison will be able to send a communication. I don't know the specifics, but that's within consular scope. Notifying family of a citizen's location during a protected review period. She was quiet again. Outside the observation window, the transit corridor lights were coming on in sequence. A slow, warm chain from the near ring outward, and the smear of light that was the Kethalon system was not visible from here. But I knew it was out there, 40-something, light hours away, in the direction the window was not facing. You said I was beautiful, she said. Yes. You were not speaking to me. No. It was a reflex. I'm sorry if it was unwelcome. It was not unwelcome, she said. It was the first time in 31 days that I had been addressed as something other than a unit number. She was quiet for a moment. The handlers are not cruel. I want to be precise about that. They are not cruel in the way that a person who hates you is cruel. They are indifferent. To them I am a very well-preserved Class 3 biological specimen with unusual cartographic cognitive markers, which is, her voice flattened slightly, which is what they wrote in the assessment summary. When I read the summary, I understood for the first time that it was possible to reduce a person to a description that was entirely accurate and entirely wrong at the same time. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. You said a word, she said, that does not appear in the assessment summary. No, I said. It wouldn't. She looked out the window again. In the hall beyond the bay door, I heard Tev Oron finishing his end-of-shift count. The sound of the manifest binder going into the filing rack. The familiar rhythm of a day closing down. The amber light from the skylight was fading now, shifting towards something cooler, the kind of gray gold that precedes the station's artificial night cycle. Bay 7's environmental lighting would compensate. It would maintain Kethalon's standard illumination through the night, warm and steady. May I ask you something? She said. Yes. You did this? She paused, assembling words. The hold, the stamp, the notification field. You did this because of a reflex? Because you happened to look up? I thought about that for a moment. I looked up because of a reflex, I said. I did the rest because once I'd looked up, I couldn't pretend I hadn't. I turned the yellow clipboard over in my hands. I've been doing this job for 19 years. I've processed several thousand transfer manifests. I've never looked at what was in the containers. I paused. I think that's what the system relies on. That people at desks will not look up. And you did. I looked up. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, Vethral's father died when Vethral was 3. It was a survey accident, a coastal shelf collapse, early in the tidal season, when the ground is unstable. I was on the same survey. I was at the other end of the site. She said it with the same level tone she had used all afternoon, the tone of a person who has told this story enough times that it has become its own kind of fact. After that, I mapped the entire southern coastal shelf. All of it. 5 years. I finished 2 years ago. The maps were archived by the Kethalon Geographic Institute. They will still be there regardless of what the BCD does with me. Yes, I said. I am telling you this, she said. Because I would like you to know who is sitting in your bay. Not what the assessment summary says. Who? Tell me whatever you want to tell me, I said. She told me about the southern coastal shelf. She told me about the tidal migration corridors and the way the kelp move in the early season, following the warm water outflow from the highland melt, and how you can see them from the survey ridge on clear days. Dark shapes in the pale blue water below, long and unhurried. She told me about her mother, who had once been a government archivist and now ran a small school in the coastal district, and was raising Vethral with the organized, cheerful authority of a woman who had raised children in a house full of maps. She told me about the fieldwork, the equipment, the methodology, the way you triangulate from two shore points to fix the position of an underwater feature, the smell of salt water, and the weight of the survey pack on a long day. The other Kethalan women listened. Some of them, after a while, spoke quietly, in their own language, and in Federation standard, adding details, correcting the coastal geography on a point or two, filling in the names and coordinates of places I would never see. They spoke to each other as people who have been through the same experience, and do not need to process it in the same moment, who can sit beside it and talk about other things while it is still there. I stayed for 2 hours. Before I left, one of the other women, a cartographer as well, named Veth Orath, who had worked the Northern Inland Survey, and whose catalog number was KA 7743, asked me what the consular process involved. Not what it would achieve. What it involved, mechanically, step by step. I walked her through it. She listened with her hands flat on her knees and her eyes level, taking it in the way a surveyor takes in terrain data, not with hope or fear, but with calculation, adjusting the internal map as new information arrived. When I finished, she said, "When we were collected, we were told we were being transferred for ecological assessment, that our survey data would be cross-referenced with BCD regional records. We were told the process would take 3 days. Yes, I said. That is the standard framing. We were not told we were biological specimens. No, I don't imagine you were. She looked at her hands. 11 of us. We were at a joint survey conference, a biannual event, in the capital. There is a hospitality reception on the second evening. The reception was, she paused. I do not know what the mechanism was. We woke in the transfer hold. I did not say anything. I had not known the collection details. They were not in the transfer paperwork, which described the acquisition only as recovered specimens, voluntary acquisition compliant, which is BCD procedural language that has been successfully challenged in compact courts on 17 previous occasions and successfully defended on 12. Vethorath, I said. Yes. The consular liaison will want your account, in as much detail as you can provide. Dates, times, the framing you were given, every exchange with the handlers. It matters for the case. She looked at me directly. You are a manifest compliance officer. Yes. This is not your brief. The notification field was blank, I said. Everything else follows from that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something in Kethalan that I did not understand. Savel, at the far end of the bench, answered briefly. Vethorath nodded once, a short, deliberate motion, and turned back to the portable reader on the table. I looked at Savel. She said that you are either very principled or very foolish. I told her that in my experience, those are not always distinguishable. I said, in this case, I think it is mostly the notification field. Yes, she said. I believe you. I stayed for 2 more hours that evening, until the night shift came on, and Tev Oron handed off the intake counter, and the hall quieted to its overnight frequency, the recycling fans, the distant creak of the docking ring, the slow pulse of the cargo bay environmental system, running its maintenance cycle. When I left, I walked back through the loading hall, and stopped at my counter, and stood there for a moment in the dark. The yellow clipboard was on the counter where I had left it. The stamp wheel was at position 9. I did not learn all of their names that first evening they came over the following days, gradually, as the review period settled into a routine. I learned them one at a time, usually at the observation window or at the long table in the bay when the morning provisions came. They are not a people who give trust quickly, and rightly so, and I did not press it. I brought what Polveth could make that was close to Kethalon's standard, and I brought the station's limited library access on a portable reader. And I answered questions about the station's layout and the transit corridor, logistics, and what exactly a category dispute review involved, and when the consular liaison was expected to arrive. By the 5th day, I knew 7 of the 11 names. By the 10th day, I knew all of them, and I knew that of the 11 women in Bay 7, 4 were survey cartographers, 2 were marine biologists from the Coastal Research Institute, 3 were field ecologists from the Highland Study Program, and 2 were academic archivists who had presented papers at the joint conference and had stayed for the reception as a matter of professional courtesy. I knew that the oldest among them was 63, and the youngest was 28, and that 3 of them had children, and 2 of them had parents in poor health, and that all of them had, in 30-some days of catalog processing and holding conditions and BCD efficiency, maintained a dignity that the assessment summary did not have a field for and could not have measured if it did. The liaison came on the 8th day. Her name was Consular Officer Teth Solon, and she was Kethalon herself, a compact and composed woman who looked at the 11 women in Bay 7 and then looked at me with an expression that combined professional composure with something that was not quite composure. She reviewed my documentation, asked me to walk her through the manifest discrepancy, and then spent 4 hours with the women in the bay while I ran my shift at the intake counter. When she came out, she came straight to the counter. The notification was never filed, she said. No. The BCD applied the research exemption preemptively, which they are not permitted to do, under the 2041 Compact Amendment without prior case-by-case consular approval. I didn't know that specifically, I said. I only knew the notification field was blank. Teth Solon looked at me with the slightly unfocused quality of a person recalibrating. The BCD's legal team will argue that the exemption filing was intended and that the notification was inadvertently omitted. They will probably prevail on a technical basis, unless the Assembly Committee motion changes the regulatory framework. 43 days from now, I said. Yes. She looked at the clipboard in my hands. You stamped this on your own initiative. It is a standard procedural code. Manifest compliance officers do not generally invoke category dispute against BCD transfers. The field was blank, I said. I check everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will be filing a consular protective interest notice covering all 11 individuals. In addition, I will be recommending that the Keth Alan Compact Representation Office submit an amicus filing to the Assembly Committee. The cases in your bay are... She paused, selecting words. Illustrative. I understand, I said. She filed the protective interest notice that afternoon. The BCD's counter notice arrived on the 3rd day as promised, precise and comprehensive, and filed by a legal team that was, as I had expected, very good at their work. The counter notice did not change the hold period. The hold was procedurally correct, and the procedural correction had to run its course. On the 14th day of the hold, Savel received a communication from the consular office confirming that her mother and son had been notified of her location and status. She came to the intake counter herself to tell me. She stood on the far side of the counter, and she said, He thinks I am on an extended survey deployment. My mother told him I was working a deep coastal site with limited communication access. Is that close enough to true? I said. It is what he needed to hear for now, she said. When I see him, I will tell him the truth. He is old enough. Yes, I said. She looked at the yellow clipboard. What is that? My clipboard. The stamp, position 9. Category dispute. Non-standard biology. I showed her the wheel. 12 positions. In 19 years I had only used this one once before, and that was for botanical samples. She looked at the blue ink circle on the manifest copy I had pinned to the station notice board, the one with the stamp impression that had started the whole process. She looked at it for what must have been 30 seconds without saying anything. "A circle," she said finally. "The stamp head is round," I said. "They are all round. It is a simple design." "A circle made from a word," she said, and something in her voice shifted slightly, in a direction I could not quite name, not quite warmth, not quite sorrow, something that has both in it. In the Catalan cartographic tradition, a circle on a map means a fixed point, a place that does not change regardless of the season or the tide, something you can orient from. She looked at me. "We do not use circles very often. Most of what we map is variable." I thought about that. "The consular review concludes in 42 more days," I said. "I don't know what the outcome will be. I want to be honest about that." "I know," she said. "The Assembly Committee hearing is in 31 days. "I know that too," she said. "Teth Solon has been keeping us informed." There was a pause. Outside the hall, I could hear the morning freight delivery coming in on the east dock, the familiar rumble and thump of containers going down the loading ramp, ordinary station sounds. The sounds of a place where the work continues, regardless of what else is happening. "Bren Solis," she said. "Yes. Why do manifest compliance officers have clipboards?" It was such a clean change of direction that I almost laughed. "Because the electronic units lose their charge in the cold end of the hall," I said. "And because certain stamp codes require a physical impression for legal validity. The blue ink is archival. It won't fade." "Archival," she said. "Permanent record." She looked at the clipboard again. Then she looked up, through the skylight panels, at the morning gray that would later become amber. "I would like to see the transit corridor from the observation window tonight," she said. "At the time when the cargo ring lights come on. You mentioned that the Catalan system is in that direction, even though it is not visible from the window. 40-something light hours," I said. "North-northeast relative to the window facing. Would you show me the bearing?" she said. I said I would. That evening we stood at the observation window in Bay 7 while the cargo ring lights came on in sequence, and I pointed out the north-northeast bearing using the cargo yard's fixed antenna array as a reference point. And she stood beside me and looked in that direction for a long time without saying anything, and I stood beside her and did the same. Not at anything in particular. At the direction. We did not speak very much. There did not seem to be a need to. Behind us, the others were at the long table with Paul Veth's provisions and the portable reader, and someone was explaining a coastal geography point to someone else with a piece of chalk on the bay floor, drawing a rough map of the southern shelf with the migration corridors marked in broad strokes. After a while, Savel said, quietly, "He will be sleeping now, Vethral. My mother puts him to bed at second bell regardless of what he is in the middle of." "That sounds like an archivist's household," I said. "Everything on schedule," she said. "Everything in its place." A pause. I used to argue with her about it when I was young. I thought it was rigid. Now I think it is how she built a world that held still long enough for me to learn to trust it. "A fixed point," I said. She looked at me sideways. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." The transit corridor lights were fully on now, the whole chain of them, warm amber white in the dark of the outer ring. In 42 days, the consular review would conclude. In 31 days, the Assembly Committee would convene. I did not know what would happen. I had made 9 phone calls and stamped a blue circle on a manifest form and shown a woman the direction of her home, and that was the sum of what I had done, and whether it would be enough I could not say. What I knew was that she was still standing beside me, looking north-northeast toward a smear of light that was too faint to see, but was nevertheless there, 40-something light hours away, permanent and located, fixed on no map I owned, but fixed nonetheless. I held the yellow clipboard in both hands. The stamp wheel sat at position 9. Neither of us moved. The light outside was the particular amber of a station that is doing its ordinary work in the ordinary dark. And for the moment, it was enough.